What you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This episode of The Forecast is sponsored by Clinic Drug, located in Morganton, North Carolina, and serving the surrounding community since 1938. Clinic Drug has a large selection of Nature's Bounty vitamins, Briar Lane Home and Garden flags, Russell Stover's candies, and Thai stuffed animals. Clinic Drug offers free delivery and 24/7 unparalleled service. Clinic Drug turns no patient away. For more information, call them at 828-584-0741, or you can find them on Facebook or go to their website, www.clinicdrug.com. Your health is our priority at Clinic Drug. Hello and welcome to The Forecast. We are your connection to the who's who in the game of golf. We hope to make you listen, laugh, and learn to win and grow your golf IQ. I'm your host, Alan Burton, Director of Instruction for the Alan Burton Golf Academy at Lake Hickory Country Club in Hickory, North Carolina. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in and to our show sponsors. Find us on themesh.tv and all your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Radio, iHeartRadio, and Google Play, and, of course, all the other shows here on themesh.tv. They're produced right here in Western North Carolina. Advertising on the Mesh Podcast Network is a low-cost way to reach a targeted audience. For more information on advertising on this show or other shows on the Mesh Network, you can send us an email to info@themesh.tv or by visiting the Mesh website at www.themesh.tv and clicking the Advertise button. Hey, this morning I'm joined by someone I'm very, very happy to have with us, Mr. Bob Koepka. He's the father of Brooks Koepka and Chase Koepka. He's down in South Florida this morning joining us. Hey, man, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I really want to start out by saying, you got a lot of things kind of to keep you occupied down there, I'm sure. You probably have your family close by. I hope in these unprecedented times you guys are doing okay.
Yeah, we're doing well. I mean, it was a little rough stretch down here for the end of March and all of April where we couldn't get out and play any golf, which we all love to do. And things are starting to get back to where we're able to play some golf and hopefully get the rest of the businesses in the area open back up shortly and get back to some normalcy.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. Our golf course has been open here in Hickory, but a lot of adjustments, to playing the game and separate carts for every golfer and a lot of walkers and that type of thing, and trying to adapt to a situation. And, it's been difficult. Certainly been some adjustments on the instruction side of things, too. I've tried to learn how to teach through the internet a little more, and but we're getting through it. I'm going to go back to teaching full-time in person myself here on Saturday. I'm looking forward to that. Are you going to try and play golf yourself a little later today?
Not today. Our course is closed on Thursdays for the maintenance and everything, but okay. I played a little bit yesterday, and I'll get out this weekend and chase a little white ball around.
Oh, good. That's great to hear. I know we had a conversation on the phone the other day. I know your buddies are probably not looking forward to getting their clocks cleaned again when you come back out there the way you're playing and chipping the golf ball. You said you chipped in a number of times on them the other day, and that's probably a pretty regular occurrence, it seems like. So,
I got pretty fortunate last time I played with one of the guys. He's a really good amateur player, and when you're playing with somebody that's a scratch or something like that, you got to step up your game. And I was fortunate enough. Against them, I chipped in 4 times in the first 10 holes, and 3 of them were for birdie, 1 was for par, and he wasn't too happy about it. And then last weekend, I drew him again, and I chipped in twice on him, and he said he just wants to get on my team.
Exactly. He needs to draw better, doesn't he? That's fantastic. Well, I mean, it bodes well. You have You've raised 2 boys there playing some really good golf, and there's obviously some reasons that has taken place. And I myself, as a dad of a young fellow who's trying to play the game at a high competitive level and get better, I'm fascinated by what your boys are doing and have done, and it's just a great story. And I want to talk to you some more today about that and how your role as a dad has helped perpetuate their success in the game. Um, I got to meet your son Chase in person. Got to watch him play a little bit in a practice round in Wilmington a few years back at the Wells Fargo for practice rounds with a player that I was working with a little bit, and it was really fun to watch his game. He was right down the middle and on the green and chips and putts like you do, and there's a reason he's playing at a high level. And he brought his game back over to America, I understand, and got qualified a little conditional status this year for the Corn Ferry Tour, and then everything kind of comes to a halt. How do you see that progressing this year as they get back to playing a little competitive golf? I'm hopeful they'll get back in June. Is that kind of the current status you're seeing? They'll get back to some competitive golf in June?
Yeah, it looks like the Corn Ferry Tour is going to start up in June, I believe, up at TPC Sawgrass up in Ponte Vedra.
Right.
Um, with everybody sitting at home and anxious to play, I'm sure when they first get started, anybody who's got an opportunity to play is going to play.
Yeah.
So with him having some conditional status, he's got to have a few guys not play in order for him to get in. He's on I guess, a short waiting list. Um, but they've got a compact schedule. They're playing every week up until I think September. So, guys aren't
Mhm.
going to play every week. So, hopefully he gets a few opportunities there, maybe, in early July and can get out there and play well. That's the key. If you play well, the opportunities will open up for you.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with what has happened is probably the first time in the history of the sport that we've seen this type of halt in competitive events, and therefore it's going to be an interesting thing to see players as they get back in that competitive arena and how they deal with that, having not been able to stay consistently prepared in the competitive mindset. So it'll be interesting for us to watch as fans to see how they do get back in the saddle and go head to head and come down the stretch and see how they handle that, after being absent from that for so long. Any thoughts you have on that and what you think we'll see?
Well, there's a lot of other factors going to be interesting for him too. Is not having spectators
Yeah,
um, out there and grandstands. Spectators and grandstands help these players out quite a bit, not just from the motivation standpoint, but
sure.
if they hit one astray, it's hard for a pro to lose a golf ball.
Right.
For so many people around to spot it for them, and now with you've got only 3 minutes to locate a golf ball, and if the rough is up, they're going to have a few volunteers out there, but it's hard. I mean, I volunteered years ago, and it's hard to pick up the ball sometimes in the sky,
Sure.
and even if they know a proximity, you know, 3 minutes goes by quick. So I think you're going to see some shots that normally, would kick off a grandstand and keep them close to the green where they could flop a shot up there where it's going to go a little further away and make that up and down more difficult. And I won't be surprised to see an increase in the number of lost balls. And it's not going to,
Mhm.
change the scores dramatically, but, it could definitely make a big difference.
Oh, I think that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. It's something I haven't really even considered too, with the absence of the fans and the grandstands you mentioned. That's really a good point. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see. And as a fan of golf, I'm certainly excited to see him get back into those trenches and play a little bit too. So I'm chomping at the bit to watch him, see how that kind of progresses. But your son Brooks has really done an amazing thing. I noticed on social media where he's through his Brooks Koepka Foundation has donated $100,000 to the local community down there through the community foundation to help with this COVID response fund, and that's just an amazing thing. I think that's something that you as a parent have got to be tremendously proud of, and to see your son step up like that and do that, that's awesome. kudos to him for sure.
Yeah, thank you. I am proud of him, and it's not just him. There's a lot of athletes in various sports and influential people that are helping out in various ways, and I think it's nice that he and these other people give back to those that are in need, and to help us get through this difficult situation that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot to be proud of, not just on the golf course, but off the golf course, because he's stand up dude. And how's his knee? Is everything good with the knee? I know he had some issues last year with the knee.
Yeah, he's fine. I think it was bothering him, I guess, last summer, and so right after the tour championship, he was having it worked on and everything, and thought it was back at 100%, and he had an unfortunate situation over in the CJ9's Cup in South Korea where he slipped on some wet concrete and wrenched his knee and injured it further, and that caused him to shut it down. But it's fine. It's not going to affect his golf game. He's itching to go. I think he's dealt with these situations before where he's had to sit out. Even before with the wrist injury, he missed the one Masters. I think it was, I want to say, 2 years ago, and came back right after that, and won. I think it was the U.S. Open and the PGA. So I think he'll come back ready to go. He's not one that has to play every day to kind of get sharp. I mean, he's had
Yeah.
layoff. He gets out there and he puts a couple weeks in of preparation. He's ready to go.
Yeah, that's always impressive to see. And as he's coming back into this competitive arena, we're going to be pulling for him. We're going to be seeing more majors, I'm sure. Is there something in particular that you think really steered him in the direction of being so focused on his fitness and really driven in that fitness arena, as a lot of golfers in today's game really are? Where do you think that started for Brooks, and where did that inspiration to become so physically fit come from?
Well, I think it all gets tied back to Tiger Woods. Tiger changed the way golfers um, prepared for golf, not just swinging a golf club and things, but exercising. And when he was in high school, my wife and I got him a membership at a local gym because he said, I want to start training and everything. And so we were all for that. And he just went over there on his own and got in there, and he just took a liking to it.
Yeah.
Not everybody likes going in and lifting weights and going through you know that exercise, and he just took a fascination to it. And I remember him coming home and saying, he was talking to these guys, I'll call them muscle heads in there, and they were doing all kinds of different lifts and stuff, and he just started talking to them, trying to figure out, why are you doing that? What's that do? And so they were bodybuilders and stuff like that, and they were, explaining to him how to do things to get in the best shape. And so he just really jumped right into it, and was doing that in high school. And then when we went off to college, it just continued because they had a trainer there to work with them and give them specific drills and things. And once he got out, it just gave him more time to get in the gym. And he's a gym rat. I think he likes lifting more than he likes practicing hitting golf balls.
Wow, that's fascinating to hear. I've got a son who's paralleling that exact mindset these days. He tried to play college golf and really fell in love with the fitness. It's obviously not affected Brooks's game in a negative way for sure, and it's fascinating to watch these players because they certainly put fitness at the top of their priorities a lot of the times. And I know it's grueling out there. They're traveling, they're playing, they're hitting a lot of balls, and they're having to play a lot of rounds. So staying in shape is important for that, sustaining themselves week in and week out. Is that something that You feel like Chase is doing more and more. How about his preparation? What do you see him doing?
Yeah, Chase is definitely doing the same things. He doesn't, he's not as big as Brooks physically, so he can't be as aggressive, say, with the weights like Brooks does. But he definitely gets after it in the gym.
Yeah.
I hear from his friends and fellow competitors about it when I see him that he's working hard in there and trying to maximize his potential and um, it's, but the big thing I think is not just the lifting part, it's the flexibility. They've got to learn to stretch um, and everything so that they stay flexible and limber. Because that's what really I think helps them stay injury free, not just being strong, but being flexible.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, tell me about your childhood. When did you play a lot of different sports growing up yourself?
We did a lot of backyard stuff, you name it. When we were growing up, I had an older brother, so I was always playing with kids older than myself. A lot of his friends, and then as my friends joined in, and um, but I kind of you know was more into baseball than anything, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of focused on baseball. I excelled at that. I love basketball, but I was short. I um, I finished my junior in high school on the varsity basketball team as the shortest guy at 5'5", and you know,
Wow.
come 6 months later, I was 6'2". Um, so I had a fun year of basketball my senior year in high school, and really kind of blossomed there. But I went on to play small college baseball as a left-handed pitcher, and um, just enjoyed that. But we were always competitive in everything. Didn't really play much golf, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
My Dick had a golf course that he built when he was done playing professional baseball, and since I didn't play football and my brother did, once baseball season was over, I would sneak up there for a couple of weeks and hang out with my cousins and hit the ball around a little bit. But I used to always joke in high school that I didn't think golf was a sport. The guys
Yep.
guys that got a Letterman's jacket for playing golf, it wasn't deserving. And it's definitely changed my perspective now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people had that perspective back in the '60s and the '70s. That golf wasn't a sport. I mean, how could you drink beer and smoke cigarettes and call that a sport? While you're doing it. But
You know,
game's changed a lot.
yeah, and I remember first time I actually met Tiger Woods and had a chance to talk with him was up at the Ryder Cup, and I thanked him, and he said, "For what?" I said, "For making golf cool again," because I
Yeah.
said, my kids I think you were a big part of my kids getting involved in golf. And he said, I'm sure you had an impact. And I think kids do, whatever their father does. If their father didn't play golf, there's probably a good likelihood that, the kid wouldn't pick it up. But so I was playing and, the kids wanted to do what I did. But, Tiger definitely made it cool. And, um, the game has just grown exponentially since then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, with your influence on your boys, tell us, our listeners are obviously, a lot of them are parents of junior golfers, and I myself in that category. Tell us as a dad, what your role was. Did you take them out to the course and get them lessons? Did you do it yourself? Did you coach them along the way? Did you buy them fitted clubs? How did they get into the game, and what was your involvement?
Basically, in the beginning, I just cut down a few of my clubs when they were little. Um, well, actually, I remember when Brooks was probably a year and a half old. I got him a little plastic set of clubs. It had one iron, one driver, and a putter, and the
Mm.
driver and the irons were angled on both sides, whether you wanted to hit it righty or lefty. And
Yeah.
he would just whack it around in the house, and then when the ball got airborne and started hitting the windows, it's like we have to go out in the backyard. And, so it just had him doing a little bit of everything. But that's kind of where he got his first introduction to golf. And then as he got older, like I said, I cut down, 3 or 4 clubs, and I would take him down to the golf course and just let him hit a few balls on the range, and then he'd just
Hmm.
hop in the cart and ride around with me, maybe while I played, 6 or 9 holes or something like that. And I would, tee the ball up at the 150 yards and tell him to hit it and, you know, count how many times it takes to get it in the hole. And I'd pick up the golf balls that I'd hit or I'd just be chipping and watching him walking down the fairway. And so just got him out there and let him have a little bit of fun. And I think that's the key is,
Yeah.
one, you got to spend some quality time with your kid, but he started to enjoy the game that I was enjoying.
Yeah. Spending time with dad was probably the biggest reason he wanted to do it too, though, you know?
Yeah, and I think so. And I I tell everyone they're like, how'd you get him to hit the ball so good? And I told them, golf, being a baseball player growing up, I always thought, hitting a curveball or a slider and things like that were the hardest thing you could do in sports.
Hmm.
But just hitting that white ball sitting still on the ground should be pretty easy.
Right.
Um, but as you get involved in it and you realize how difficult it is, um, I made the decision when I took the kids to the range. It didn't matter if they were hitting an iron or what. I teed the ball up for
Okay.
them, and because I think young kids have an ego just like we do as adults,
Hmm.
and they get excited when they see the ball going really far. They don't care what direction it goes in.
Right.
So I would tee the ball up on the range, and I wanted them swinging hard at it.
Yeah.
And because if it's on the ground, you watch so many people when they first start out, whether it's men or women, they take this big long backswing, and then they slow down as they get towards the golf ball to make sure that they can get the club face to make contact with the golf ball.
Right. Yeah.
I always use the analogy of riding a bicycle. When you first
Hmm.
get started, you start pedaling really slow, and you
Hmm.
have a hard time controlling the bike. It starts to, you know,
Right.
move all over the place. And
Yeah.
the faster you pedal, the easier it is to stay upright.
Very
And I
good.
think golf swing, when you try to slow it down, you can't keep it on the same path or the same plane. So
Right.
if they could just swing hard at it, and they would get excited when they hit the ball 60 yards to the right, even though they're supposed to
Sure.
hit it straight forward. And
Sure.
I tell people, I said, if you put the ball on the ground, they're going to chunk it. They're going to hit the ground. They're going to
Yeah.
top it, and they're going to see the ball roll 4 or 5 feet off the ground, off, in front of
Right.
them. And at some point, frustration is going to kick in,
Yeah.
and they're going to look over at the soccer field and see a kid running up and down there, and they're just going to get away from golf. So I teed it up, and then over time, they develop enough hand-eye coordination. You just start sneaking the tee lower and lower, so
Hmm.
eventually the ball's on the ground, and they don't even know it.
Boy,
And
that is gold right there. That is golden right there. Listeners, pay attention. Dads out there want to get your kids into golf. That is a brilliant thing. And I agree with you 100%. You want to make the game fun and easy. Put it on a tee and let them swing hard at it. Yeah. And they'll learn to get the ball in the way of that swing, won't they?
yeah, and you know what? I was able to. I'm not a golf instructor and never pretended to be, but um, I work with both my kids to get them to where they had enough hand-eye coordination that they could hit the ball in the direction of the target. May not, may not go on the green, but it's at
Hmm.
least moving forward. And as I saw they started developing some decent hand-eye coordination, I realized, if they wanted to get better at it, that they need to get the proper instruction. Because they'd ask me how to hit a shot, and I taught myself how to play. And never had a lesson,
Yeah.
uh, and was fortunate enough to become scratch plus one handicap at my peak before getting any lessons. And but maybe the way I was doing it wasn't the proper way. It's just I could figure out a way to do it.
Right.
And so I know when Brooks first started playing a couple junior tournaments where they played like 9 holes, I'd gotten him a junior set, and then I realized I needed to get him all the clubs, not just the odd numbered irons.
Yeah.
And he seemed to like it. He was playing baseball at the time, and he did roller hockey. He did a number of different things, but I decided I would put him in with my good friend Warren Botke, who's a PGA pro, and I called Warren up. I'd gotten some lessons from Warren at that time, and we were good friends and played in a couple pro-am things together. And I said, Brooks has got an interest in golf and he wants to get better. And I said, I've got a question for you. Would you be interested in working with him? And he said, well, I've got one condition. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, as long as I'm the teacher and you're the dad. And, you know, being typical me, I came back to Warren and said, well, I've got one condition too. And he said, what's that? I said, that I can at least come watch the lessons so I can see what you're telling him so that I know what he needs to do when he's practicing. Because
Yeah, right.
I don't believe that you just have them go get a lesson 2 or 3 times a week. I don't think you improve on that. I think when you go to get a lesson, Warren was always looking to focus on one thing at a time. Because he said, I think if I give him too much to think about, he'll never remember it. So he would kind of focus on one thing during a lesson, and then he would, come with me to the golf course, and I'd just watch him hit balls on the range. Didn't try to be his instructor, but I was like, hey, remember what Warren told you?
Yeah,
And just watch. And I'd reinforce that. And then, after a week or 2 weeks of doing that, we'd schedule another one. And now Warren would work on something else. But it was, everyone asked me, is there a shortcut? And I said, no, it's really simple. It comes back to PGA, position, grip, and alignment.
yeah.
You know, some people call it posture, position, but those were the things that Warren always started every lesson with and said, if you can get those 3 things down, he said, you'll have a chance to succeed.
That's great. Yeah, I'm kind of old school that way myself to a degree. I think you have your own way of doing things, but a golfer does have some framework. There's a connection to the club, a connection to the ground, and a connection to the target that you're trying to make, and that basically sums it up, doesn't it?
Sure
Fantastic.
does.
Yeah.
And I think as parents, what we need to do, and we all have the same issues with our kids. They don't want to listen to us.
Yeah.
We think that's unique to us, but it's not. We all have that same challenge
Yeah.
out there. I'd see Brooks talking to a guy who's a 25 handicap on the range, and then he'd be telling me what this guy was showing him, and I'm thinking to myself, that's not what you need to be doing, son. But you know, there were, the kids. It's a typical, kid. They don't think you're giving them, good information, or, you know, something's not right. And I would always tell my kids, look, I have a vested interest in seeing you do well. Why would I give you bad information?
Right. Right.
And so I think the key is just, be supportive of them and be consistent. And I always lived the theory. My parents were never let my brother and I win at anything.
Yeah.
Um, and we played cards when we were 3 and 4 years old. And, you know, my dad used to say, if you want to win, you better figure out a way, figure out a
Yep.
strategy.
Yep.
And so I did exactly what my mom and dad did. There's not a book on how to raise your kids, but you just do what you think is right. I always say, if you just be consistent about it and be honest with them, it'll normally work out well. And I beat my kids at whatever we did. If we were shooting hoops or we were going out to play golf, I never let them win.
Mm-hmm.
And my whole theory with that is when he goes out to compete against his friends, they're not going to let him win either.
That's right.
And if you let your kid win, he's expecting to win all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when he doesn't, how's he going to handle that?
Right.
And,
Right.
so I just figured I'm going to prepare him for the real world and make him earn everything he's got.
That's great. That's a kind of a sentiment that I have as well, and I teach these juniors. I say, well, you don't win all the time. The greatest golfer in the world won maybe 20% of the time they played. I said, but when you're not winning, you're not losing if you're learning. You're going to win or you're going to learn. And that's the way I like to look at it too. I think there's opportunities when you don't come out on top. can you learn something from that experience that's going to help you prepare next time? And that's what you're trying to teach them, how to win. It's a process, and they have to learn to learn to lose and learn from losing.
It's funny you say that. There's always kids that are advanced at a young age. They seem to be better than other kids at that age, no matter what. And Brooks he played his first little 9-hole tournament when he was 7, and I'd say he was about 9 years old. And one day we were just sitting around the house, and he said, I want to beat Kenny Leach this weekend in the tournament. I'm like, no, you don't. He said, yeah, I just want to beat Kenny. And I said to him, Brooks, your goal isn't to beat Kenny, it's to beat the golf course.
Right.
He kind of looked at me funny, and I said, you beat the golf course, you'll beat Kenny.
Yeah.
And we took him up to Vero Beach that weekend, and it was the first time it was going to be an 18-hole tournament. They were going to play 9 Saturday and 9 Sunday. And for 9 holes, Brooks got the lead. So he is just so excited. And normally he would have won the tournament, but this was not a 9-hole tournament. And we went to the ice cream shop down the beach that night. And we walk in there, and there's 4 or 5 of his buddies in the tournament. And they're all like, man, Brooks, you're winning. And God, he was grinning from ear to ear and everything. And, he was so proud and full of himself. And come Sunday, we get to the golf course, and all you can do is just walk around and watch. You can't offer advice or do anything. And
Right.
watching the 9 holes go by, and boom, all of a sudden that lead starts shrinking and everything. And Kenny came back, and his other nemesis was the kid Jack Beindorf that went to Auburn and played at Auburn, a lefty. And
Yeah.
Brooks finished third, and I saw him in the scoring tent. And I'm standing outside there, and he comes running out of that scoring tent, and he's flying right at me. And I kind of bend over a little bit, and he just jumps right in my arms, and his legs are wrapped around my waist and his arms around my shoulders, and he's crying on my shoulder. And I said, "What's wrong, son?" And he's sniffling and going, "I lost." I said, "Yeah, I know, but you came in third." And he's crying. It hurts. And I said, "Well, you remember how this feels?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, remember it." And I said, "And do everything you can next time not to have this same feeling." I said, "You got to
Yeah.
learn how to lose first, son, before you can learn to win."
That's fantastic. Wow, what a great story. Well, I'm sure that was impactful in so many ways, and that's that to your brilliance right there. You're just a fantastic dad. I try to help my players and their parents kind of navigate the waters of competitive events like golf, and it's a hard game, and you're not always going to be on top. But that's the lesson we're trying to teach these kids really, as to how to deal with those shortcomings and how to be stronger. Be stronger people, be stronger competitors, and that's part of the process. I think that's great. So as you're telling some great stories, and you get in the car with your boy and make those long journeys after a tournament, you're probably the kind of dad that sits and listens more than talks, and that's really I think a powerful thing to do with these kids after they played events. Tell us some of those stories where you're on the road and you're watching him play, and he opens up and says, "Hey, Dad, thanks." What at what point do you feel like he started to understand, how helpful you had been, and has there been a moment like that where he's come around and said, Dad, I really appreciate all the time you spent with me, taking me to these tournaments and stuff? Where did that take place?
I think they get into their mid-teens, is when they really start to appreciate it. I think when they're younger, they just kind of think that's what you're supposed to do, and I don't think they understand because you know people always say Brooks has put a lot of work in, or Chase has put a lot of work in, but I think the whole family does. The whole family, makes a sacrifice in order for an athlete in any sport to get to the collegiate level, let alone the professional level. And most of us, I never had any expectations of my kids playing professionally. I got them into golf, hoping that when they got out of college that we could go play golf together on the weekend
Right.
at the local club and everything. So um, you can't put too much pressure on them to try and do that. But the one, I guess, the earliest story riding in the car um, with Brooks, I can recall, he was in the sixth grade and he made his high school golf team because in Florida, if you go to a small school and it's at one location, you can actually play in the sixth grade. And so he made the team, and it was a small little Christian school, and he was tickled to death with himself. But he definitely wasn't a big pond, a big fish in a small pond. So, anyways, I think it was about the second or third 9-hole match, and he shot like 39. And I mean, to be honest with you, he had to hit 9 drivers because he couldn't reach the par threes. And
Mhm.
The par fives he'd be hitting driver 3 wood wedge, and par fours he's hitting driver 3 wood wedge. And I used to
Yeah.
tell him just try and steal as many pars as you can, and you keep it at bogey, you'll probably do okay. But we're driving home, and Brooks and Chase are in the back seat, and Brooks just comes out with an announcement: in 4 years he's going to quit school and turn pro in the 10th grade. And my wife tells a story that she said, if you could have seen the look on your face, I pulled the car off the road and put it in park and turned around and told him, I said, you think you're going to turn pro and drop out of school? I said, well, let
Yeah.
me just explain something to you, son. You will finish high school. I said, you will go to college. And I said, and if you're still playing golf in college and you're good enough, then you can turn pro, but not until
Yeah.
then. Um, we've had many a good talks, and um, my wife will remind me sometimes that I talk more sometimes than I listen. Um, but those are really good times. I think where sometimes it's just you and your son or your daughter riding in the car, and you get to hear what their perspective was. And I always try to go to. I didn't go to every tournament and walk every hole, but I tried to, especially when they were growing up, because I felt like it was important to watch what they were doing, and if there was any way I could help them, maybe to think differently or something like that, that we could talk about it on the car ride home. And
Hmm.
because I've had many parents say, "Oh, I don't go out and watch my kid; he doesn't want me out there," and I'm just like, "Wait a second, I don't get this. You just sit in the clubhouse or sit in the car, for 4 hours waiting for them to come in." And they're like, "Yeah, he gets nervous." I'm like, "Well, then he or she'll never make it."
Right.
And I always told my kids, I said, "Look, if you think I'm not coming out, you're crazy." I said, "I paid the entry fee. I'm coming to watch the show."
You darn
And
right.
the
Yeah.
main thing I did was, I'd write notes down. I always had a scorecard, and I'd write down if they hit the fairway or they hit it in the water, whatever they did.
Yeah.
And if I saw them making a bad decision, I would just kind of write a little note down on the scorecard. And so when we're riding home, I was like, what were you trying to do on hole 13? With your second shot. And he'd explain, what he was trying to do. And I said, well, did you ever think about doing this instead?
Yeah.
Do you ever think, maybe why take out the 60-degree lob wedge and try and flop it up onto the green when you got 50 feet of green, the pin's in the back, and you're right off the front edge?
Yeah.
Think about getting a little bump and run because you don't know if that, lob wedge. And so just trying to get them to think, and they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. And I'm like, well, maybe next time you're in that position, you'll remember that. And, it's a better shot. It's a shot that's going to be more successful more often than your lob wedge is. And, that's the reason why you've got 14 clubs. And, so we just talked about things like that. And, there was one other funny story. I remember Brooks getting in the car with me and complaining that he didn't sleep well the night before, and he had a little bit of a head cold and everything. And so we, got in the car, and I said, "Oh, hey, did you hear about little Johnny? Had all kinds of issues, and um, you know, something happened with his mom, something happened with his dad, and I had made the whole thing up, but I
Yeah.
didn't tell him. And I said, "You think we ought to give Johnny a couple extra shots off his score today?" And he looked at me kind of crazy and said, "Well, no, why would we do that?" I'm like, "Well, all the issues he's going through, maybe we need to make him feel better and everything." And Brooks was like, "No, we're not doing that." I said, "Well, then no one wants to hear about the fact that you didn't sleep well and had sniffles last night." But,
That's great. Yeah. Give them a perspective of their own. Yeah. That's really good.
yeah, sometimes you have to mentally challenge him. I mean, I remember another time, he got in the car and I said to him, I said, "What club are you going to play with today?" And he kind of looked at me funny, and I said, "What club are you going to use today?" He said, "Well, I'm going to use them all." And I said, "No, you have to use one club today." And he's like, "What do you mean I have to use one club?" And I said, "Yeah, you have to hit one club the whole way around." And and he's like, "Was everybody else?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Well, that's not fair." And I said, "It's not." And he's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "Well, that's going to be really hard." And I said to him, "Brooks, going through life with only one option is going to be really hard too." Because
Yeah.
he always had the mentality of, "I don't want to do anything other than play golf." And
Right.
you got to have a backup plan. And, he and Chase always said, "We don't have a backup plan." You know, if we have a backup plan, and then we won't work hard enough to make sure that plan A works.
Wow. That's brilliant. That is fantastic right there. Great perspective there. That is really good stuff. I tell you what, man, it leaves me speechless for a second thinking about that introspective approach you've taken. That's been very powerful, obviously. Um, Teaching all the time. That's what good dads do. My dad's that way. He teaches in those types of ways, and I'm very thankful for that. So I'm sure your boys will come to a day where they'll be the same kind of dad you are, and pass some of that wisdom along to their kids, and that's really cool, really good stuff. So as a golfer, you got 4 hole-in-ones from what I understand. That's the total count at the moment. So you're a good golfer, good player, carrying a single-digit handicap or maybe even close to scratch there at your own club. Are you into instruction for yourself these days, or you still play it by the way you learned?
I go see Warren probably maybe once a year, probably on average.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I call him, he's like 911. Yeah, we got an emergency. Um, I the thing I really appreciate about Warren is he would always explain what he was doing, or that you could watch the golf ball and it will tell you what you're doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And he would explain, he said, if the ball's going right, it's one of these three things. If
Mm-hmm.
it's going left, it's one of these three, and everything. And so I was one that I could just watch the golf ball, whether it was Chase hitting it or Brooks hitting it or even myself, and say, okay, it's one of these three problems.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could always kind of figure it out. And, the biggest challenge for me sometimes is you start tinkering a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
And, next thing you know, my biggest challenge is my alignment gets off and I get closed. So I don't think I'm closed, but I am. So as
Mm-hmm.
a result, my hands just will kind of adapt, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll pull inside trying to make up for the, the bad alignment. So now all of a sudden I've created a second problem, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
coming over the top with my swing or whatever. And um, so I just learned to try and keep it as simple as possible, because that's how I learned. I watched somebody when I was at my uncle's golf course. I'd see a guy hitting shots, and I'm like, "Wow, that guy's really good." And so if I was out ranging, I'd just kind of see that guy hit this one shot, and later on, if he came into the bar and I was bartending, I'd say, "Hey, Alan, I saw you on the eighth hole and you had that shot down here in the left rough and you just threw that thing up there and landed so soft. Well, how'd you do that?" And then I'd go out and practice it. So
Yeah.
um, I just always been able to pick things up and kind of work it out. But I used to always joke is the two things that kind of screwed up my golf game was uh, my kids and the golf channel because um, when you start to struggle, which we all will at some point in time or another, I mean, with golf, you never own your game, your swing, you just rent it. And so as I was struggling, I'd be going, geez, on the golf channel, they said if you're blocking it, you ought to do this. So
Mhm.
you start changing everything, and now you get yourself real out of whack. And that's when you make the 911 call to Warren.
Yeah.
Um, or we'd be on the range, and my kids would be like, "Hey, Dad, you got to make sure you keep." I never thought technique. I never thought about my golf swing. I picked up the game, and I grabbed an 8 iron and said, "Okay, that goes 155 or 160 yards," and all I cared about was how far out I was. I put the club behind the ball and I swung at it and I hit it.
Yep.
Uh, I use the analogy when I would shoot free throws. I didn't worry about where my elbow was and
Mhm.
where my head was and did I have my hand over here. I just let my instincts take over, and I kind of did that with golf. And the kids were getting lessons, and Chase would always, Dad, you need to do this or you need to do that. And I said
Mhm.
they screwed up my golf game.
They're always listening. I know they have a lot of great coaches in their ear constantly, telling them the next greatest physical thing that they need to do to create more speed or more more control of their trajectory or whatever they're working on. And that those technical approaches to the game for most people are going to confuse them or leave them thinking too much. And you want to understand what's required, but as simply as possible. Golf needs to be a fun game, and certainly you don't think about how you're going to walk from point A to point B. And most days we do it pretty well and don't fall down. So obviously there's a way our body and brain can communicate that message to move and move the golf ball. But yeah, you're right. Watching the ball and learning how to diagnose things from what the ball is telling you is the best way to play. I think more fun. You're trying to control the ball ultimately in games. So golf is what the ball does. That wasn't my saying. I think that was John Jacobs that said that. But golf is what the ball does.
Yeah. And, I always tell people the thing that I hear people going, "Oh, my kid, he's already hitting a draw and he's hitting a fade," and I'm sitting there thinking, just forget that stuff. The hardest thing to do is hit a straight shot.
Yeah.
Learn how to hit a straight shot, and then that tells me that you can square the club face up.
Hmm.
You can return it down the line, and you've got it. If you can hit it straight. And then I thought the second most important thing was flighting the golf ball.
Hmm.
And I always made sure, and I didn't know how to do it. I kind of did it my way, but like I said, it wasn't necessarily the correct way. But once the kids got, to the point where they could hit it straight, I made sure that they got with the instructor and learned how to flight it. Because if
Hmm.
you can take it and flight a golf ball, you've got tremendous advantages, whether it's windy conditions or, downwind, into the wind, right to left, doesn't matter. If you can hit it straight and you can control the ball flight, you'll learn how to fade it and draw it.
That's right. I saw on social media you had a picture of being in Ireland. I believe it was that this year or was that last year you were over?
Uh, that was last year for the Open Championship up at Port Rush.
Yeah. Did you get to play any yourself while you were over?
I sure did. Had an opportunity to play 3 different times there. I played a course down in Waterville called Hogs Head,
Uh huh.
nice link style course, and then played La Hinch,
Okay.
great golf course. They had just hosted the Irish Open, I think like 3 weeks before that.
Right.
And really neat little town, great golf course, a lot of history there. It's been there over 100 years. And then I played up at Port Stewart up in Northern Ireland. I really wouldn't count that as a round of golf. I mean, it was pouring down rain, and I had gotten the opportunity to go over there and play this course. And I thought, I got to go anyways. My wife dropped me off, and she said, I don't think you're going to be able to play. And I said, well, let me see. I had my rain gear and everything, and we were on the guy in the pro shop said, you can play by yourself, or I can put you with three young gentlemen. And I said, no, I'd rather play with some guys. And so it lightened up to a light drizzle when we were on the putting green. And by the time we got to the first tee, it was pouring down rain.
Yeah, of
And those guys said, well, we're playing. And I looked and I said, I don't want to be one of those Americans that wimps out on
course you are. Yeah.
them. They think there's something wrong with us. And
Yeah.
so we played in 18 holes of pouring down rain. And
Oh
I've never
man.
been so wet in my life. But I became friends with those three, and I saw all three of them over at the tournament. And I think it was 2 months ago in February, the one called me. He was coming here to Florida, and he came down with his dad and his brother, and I hosted him at the club here, and we went out and had lunch and played 18 holes and told some stories. So I, made a friend for life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I got to go last August and played with some buddies in Ireland. We played 8 rounds of golf in a 10-day stretch there last August, and man, I tell you what, a trip that was. Talking about flighting the golf ball and seeing all the different weather conditions in a 4-hole stretch. You saw all 4 seasons. It was very, very fun. Very, very good time. Yeah, I loved it over there. The people were so nice. The food was amazing. The golf was spectacular. Just, it was a lot of fun. Can't
Yeah,
get
if
enough.
anybody gets a chance, they got to go there. I mean, there's just an unlimited supply of great golf courses, and they love to see Americans over there. And the Irish people just treat you
Yeah,
special.
yeah, absolutely. Friends for life for sure once you go, and I can't recommend that trip enough for sure. Well, I'll tell you, my friend, you can really pick up in talking to you just how down to earth you are, and there's a reason that your family is successful, not just on the golf course, but as people. And I'd love to have you back on very soon. It really seems like you've done everything a parent can possibly do to create young, healthy, humans. There, kudos to you for doing that. Um,
Thank you. Hopefully, we're talking about some live golf.
yeah, I would love to do that. Love to have you play a little golf. And you going to come up this way for any tournaments in the next year or so? I know you'll be going towards Augusta probably in November. What do you think that tournament's going to be like in the fall of the year?
That's going to be really interesting. Always been my favorite tournament. I was fortunate enough. I hired a gentleman to work for me that lived outside of Augusta, and he had tickets. I didn't know it at the time because we were talking. I was I was trying to get him to come to work for me. He was working for a competitor, and I asked him, oh, where's that? And he said, you ever hear of Augusta? And I said, yes. I said, always wanted to go there. And he says, well, he said, I've got two tickets. And I said, to him, I said, Philip, there's nothing to negotiate. Tell me what you want.
Yeah.
You got it. And he had given me the tickets, and had the pleasure of taking my father, my brother, my wife, a couple friends, and I've taken both kids there. I took Brooks there when he was 8 years old, because he had gotten a hole in one at a little um, par three golf course, and he was there when Jose Marie won, and I just had some special times at that place, and
Hmm.
um, had Chase there when Tiger won the Tiger Slam in 2000, and
Oh wow.
I think it's going to be really interesting because one year I was there when they didn't have the azaleas; they bloomed too early.
Yeah.
So it's going to look really different. I don't know what kind of uh, color they can put in that place in November. Um, the golf course I think will play a lot different because at that time of year it could be really cold, and
Hmm.
the golf ball won't go as far. Um, don't know about wind direction and stuff like that, but typically as seasons approach, the direction of the winds will change, which could make a big impact. Um,
Hmm.
you know, um, Maybe the par fives won't be as reachable with I'll call them mid irons or short irons for those guys. Maybe they're going to be back there trying to hit a long iron in or even a wood.
Mm-hmm.
So they might find themselves laying up more. Um, but I know that the powers that be there will have that course in the best possible shape at that time of year, and so it will be really interesting to see how it's
Oh,
played in November, and then of course won't be long 6 months later be back there again. So
right.
whoever wins that green jacket will be the shortest stint ever of being
Exactly.
a champion.
Exactly. Well, that's definitely something to look forward to. As I mentioned, having you back on the show soon. I'd love to have you back on after the boys get back out in the competitive arena playing a little bit. We can chat about things as they progress. And you've been a great guest, Mr. Koepka. I really appreciate you taking time to join us today. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any final comments that you want to pass on to the listeners as we get close to a season of golf?
Well, I just hope everybody stays safe out there and comes out of this healthy and um, gets out there and enjoys the game of golf for them personally on the golf course as well as watching the guys play. And I know I miss seeing that live competition, and I look forward we can get back to everybody, enjoying it and hearing the roars of the crowds. And the only thing I would just tell everybody is to just continue to enjoy the game. It's a great game. You can play it your whole life, and there's challenges all the way through. Whether you're a scratch golfer or an 18 handicap, you can always get better, and just understand where you are in the game, and don't be afraid to move forward and play a shorter tee. As we get older, we don't hit it as far as we used to.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice. It certainly is. Well, listen, thank you so much, and stay safe and healthy with your family down there in South Florida. And best of luck to your boys this year as they get back in that competitive arena playing some golf. Look forward to pulling for them and seeing more major championships come your way. If our fans and listeners want to reach out to you through social media, should they use a particular platform? Are you okay with they send you a message on Facebook to say hello and thank you for being on?
Yeah, no problem. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter as well, and I enjoy following everything that has to do with golf. It's my passion, and whether it's my boys or, like I said, just the game in particular, I love it, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on here with you, and hope to see you sometime soon.
Yeah, likewise, sir. It's been my pleasure. I want to thank you, and best of luck to you guys. We'll speak soon. Listeners, that's been our show. We've been very honored to have Bob Koepka with us. Certainly a great conversation about his boys and his love of the game. Some great advice there. If you'll listen back, parents, your junior golfers are in good hands if you follow the Bob Koepka handbook. We're going to start talking about that in all my junior programs. And it's a very, very good, solid advice there, raising youngsters in the game. So please appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll have another great guest on next time. This has been The Forecast. I'm your host, Alan Burton, saying farewell and stay safe, golfers. Looking forward to a better year, 2020.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.